conversation. Okay, brilliant. So welcome everybody. Welcome Manda. Thank you so much for doing this. This is another one in our series of conversations that we have with all sorts of people from all over the world. And this conversation series is called Living Well Now. So I'm going to be asking you about your take on that, Manda. As I said, you'll get a chance later to ask questions, to share what you want to share with Manda. But I'm absolutely thrilled that you're here, Manda. I'm a big fan of your work, your wisdom, your writing. And just wanted, for those of you that don't know it, to share Manda's website here, Accidental Gods. Just putting that in the chat. And there's a whole load of resources on there, which I've certainly found really, really useful. So I encourage you to go and explore that website. So in that website, you say, Manda, just by way of an introduction, you say another world is possible. We have the power of gods to destroy our home, but we also have the chance to become something we cannot yet imagine. And by doing so, to transform the nature of ourselves and all humanity. We have the capacity now, here at the dawning of the third decade of the third millennium, to make humanity's next evolutionary step one of consciousness, consciously chosen. No more slow tweaks to DNA. This is a radical change in the nature of what it is to be human. This is about all of us becoming the best we can be, and then together becoming something so much greater than the sum of our individual parts. And you place a lot of emphasis in your website on the importance of resilience, to return to a place of balance, of inner wholeness, from which we can generate the courage, clarity, connection, and compassion we'll need to flourish. So it's a very inspiring vision. Yeah, tell us, let's start with, like, how can we, given the title of this series, Living Well Now, what can you offer us in the way of wisdom about how to do that, especially as the news becomes increasingly dire day by day?
Brilliant, really good question, thank you, and thank you for the invitation to speak. All right, I think it's worth taking a step back a moment. Let me describe to you how Accidental Gods arose, and then we can see where it's got to. Does that work for you? If I lose anybody, stick a hand up and ask. Please don't let this just be me talking at you. So my spiritual path is shamanic. I started off life as a veterinary surgeon, and then I became a novelist, and then as a pure shamanic imperative, I ended up doing a master's in regenerative economics at Schumacher College in Devon. Before said shamanic imperative, I didn't know Schumacher College existed, and economics, I promise you, was nowhere on my radar. And then it was, and that was a completely life-changing event. And I ended up teaching on the same course that I'd studied at one of the electives. And on the first year of teaching that elective, so January 2018, I walked in and Jonathan, the head of the college, or the head of the economics course, said, "Have you read Deep Adaptation?" And I, no, I'm reading these books, list of books. And he looked at me and went, "It's a paper, read it." So I downloaded it that night and read it and didn't sleep at all. I wept all night. I found Faith at a sensible time the following morning and said, "Okay, forget worrying about pensions, forget all the things we're worrying about. There will be no money to speak of by the time we're at pensionable age. We need to change." And when I got home, we moved over the hill from where we were and bought a very tumble down small holding where we now live. And the following, so every solstice, as part of our practice, we sit with, particularly the winter solstice, light the fire, switch everything off, sit with the fire and connect with the gods as we understand them. And the winter solstice after that event, so winter solstice 2018, I had two visions. And one was of that the Earth as seen from space, that kind of blue pearl floating through the blackness of space that we're all familiar with from the moon launches. But it was covered in a web of millions upon millions of tiny, very fine strands of light all around, crisscrossing all over. And when I first saw it, it was nighttime and these were moonlight colored silver. And when I see it in daytime, they're sun colored. But they cross and cross and cross and cross. And as I asked more deeply, what I got was that each of these crossing points was a node of consciousness, and that some of these were human, but most of them were not. So that was vision number one. Then I teach something that is called shamanic dreaming. So contemporary shamanic practice as a way of connecting to the gods of this land in a way that feels real and authentic and isn't trying to pretend that we're something other, but that the gods are still here and still there to be connected with. And I had just that September taken my very first group. It had taken 15 years to get the first group all the way around the particular cycle. And we'd started, of the hundreds who had started off, 9 had ended up going through it. And I come to the fire and go, look, guys, 9 people, we got there. And what I got back was 9 people in 15 years is not going to cut it, really. You need to be teaching at scale. I can't. The whole point of shamanic practice is it's one-on-one. Anything more than 12 people and it starts to fall apart. Trust me, I've been there. And the second vision that arose was of me standing on a stage in America, and I don't fly because carbon, talking to very large numbers of people, and like, what? And neither of these visions made any sense. And this is the nature of shamanic practice. Stuff comes and you spend the rest of the year working out what the heck it meant. So the second one began to make sense very quickly, because about 4 days after that, I got an email from someone in the States who said, right, there's about 50 of us and there's one of you. So that's 50 flights to the UK or 1 flight to the US. What do you want? And if I hadn't had that vision, I would basically have told them where to jump. Just please don't, carbon, just don't do this. You've got people in the States. But I had the vision, so I agreed to go. And then I had to work out what I could teach at scale. So the whole thing began to be coherent. But in trying to understand the first vision, which has made a huge emotional impact, I came to understand that it was linked to this concept of conscious evolution, which is not my idea at all. I just began to explore it and it began to make sense. And so one of the things that had really struck me in the teaching at Schumacher was the concept of emergence from complex systems. Is everybody familiar with that, or do you want me to go over it? You are all familiar with it, yes? Or do you want me to go over it? And we now have double symbols. Stick a finger up if you want me to go over it. You don't. You do. Okay. All right. Difference between complex and complicated. Complicated things tend to be made by people. They are linear. They are completely predictable. So my standard metaphor is a Boeing 747 is a complicated thing. There are over 6,000 parts. I Googled it. I know this. But if somebody gave you the giant IKEA kit with each part numbered and a good instruction set and the right tools and a big barn, you could build a 747. It is wholly predictable. People do that. They are flying in the sky all the time. If you built one from scratch, it might not fly first time, but eventually you get there. And once you're in it, all the systems are linear. If you turn the steering wheel to the right, I'm sure this isn't how it works in a Boeing 747, but basically it turns right. You turn the steering wheel to the left, it goes left. You put your brakes on, it stops. Things happen linearly. Complex systems are unpredictable and non-linear. That's the definition. And biological systems are complex adaptive systems. The weather is a complex adaptive system. The cells in your body are complex adaptive systems. The organs that they make are complex adaptive systems. Your humanity that is the result of all those cells and all those organs is a complex adaptive system. And the social structures that we are making are complex adaptive systems. They were complex adaptive systems when we lived in tribes of 150, the Dunbar number. Let me take a step back. One of the classic metaphors that people use for expressing complex adaptive systems, there are two. One is an ant colony. And when people started studying complex adaptive systems, they looked at ant colonies, and you take the ant colony and you give it a new problem, like a chasm to cross, and all these ants are milling around. And at some utterly unpredictable point, they all join hands basically and create a bridge, and then the other ants can get across the chasm. And no one has yet predicted how this works. One of the slightly more obvious complex adaptive systems is a caterpillar. If you came from Mars and found, I'm growing nasturtiums in my garden as an edible food, and they're covered in caterpillars at the moment, and you saw these little green things with dark spots eating up my nasturtiums, what would you think they would grow into? Yeah, if you had never seen it and you didn't have a biology book, I absolutely defy anybody to predict that they would turn into a chrysalis, and that the totality of the caterpillar would dissolve into DNA soup, from which what they call imaginal cells would arise. And in the beginning, those imaginal cells are destroyed because they're seen as foreign, but then more arise, and they clump together to make imaginal islands, which clump together to make imaginal organs, which finally clump together to make a butterfly. And the point is that neither the ant bridge nor the butterfly, until you have seen them, are predictable from the previous state. A complex adaptive system increases its complexity on a curve that's dependent on a lot of different factors. And then it's more or less your standard kind of S-wave curve. It reaches maximal complexity, after which there is a bifurcation. And I'll do it like this. It either falls away into extinction and just ceases to exist, the caterpillar dies, or it emerges into a new system, which was, by definition, completely unpredictable from the system before. If you can predict it, it's not a new system, it's an iteration of the old system. That's the key that I want you to take. If it's predictable, it's not a new system. So we have 64 million years since the last mass extinction in which humanity has evolved. Probably 300 to 400 years of modern humans, but they keep pushing the time zone back. So several 100,000 years of modern humanity, for almost all of which we have been forager hunters. I learned the other day, I haven't got the book still. I did a podcast with an amazing guy called Rob Percival. It's really worth reading his book. It's called The Meat Paradox, and it's beautifully written and it's really interesting. And he explored the ancestral paintings in the caves in southwest France. And I hadn't realized that they were painted over a span of 30,000 years, 30,000 years. Our ancestors went in there for 1,000 generations of people doing what I would imagine would be rites of passage and then shamanic experience. And all they painted was animals. No plants, no people, very, very few, one or two shamanic figures, no structures, no trees, not the sun and the moon, just animals. It's amazing. Anyway, so we've got all of this history behind us when we existed where our communication was basically verbal. And the old people in the tribe remembered stuff and they told it to the young people. A friend of mine lived for a while with the Kung people in Africa and said one of the most striking things she came away with was that if a baby died, it wasn't great, but you can make another one. You know, they come, they go, this is what happens. When an old person died, it was an absolute disaster. And the whole tribe went into mourning for a very long period of time because that's your source of wisdom and knowledge. And they've got to be old when, you know, what's the chances of that? Very small. So by definition, they were a very wise person. So, and how our culture is the complete opposite. And part of the reason it's the complete opposite is that we don't rely on oral transmission of our knowledge anymore. So we went in an evolutionary terms, a very short period of time. Somebody expressed to me the timeline of the planet as a toilet roll recently, and basically human evolution is less than a hair's width of the last sheet of paper on the last roll of the toilet roll, which does weird things to my head. So in that tiny span of evolutionary time, we've gone from basically how far can I shout, to, oh, look, I can make marks on a rock and I can leave the rock and you might be able to see the rock, to, oh, look, let's create writing. And then we create money, disaster, never mind. And I can write things on bits of paper and store them for posterity. And then I can send them with people and we develop ciphers, and I tattoo a slave's head and let his hair grow and I send him off and the guy at the other end shaves it and then kills him. And then very recently we developed Telegram and we can send Morse. across oceans, which is amazing. And then we develop digital technology. And in this tiny span of basically the lifespan of everyone on this call, we've gone from being able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody at the other side of the world not very easily, one-on-one, to the potential that this could be a Zoom call with 100,000 people all around the planet. We can share ideas in real time across very wide spans of people. And I think that is our complex adaptive system reaching maximal complexity. We're looking at, I would say, the disintegration of predatory capitalism as we speak. And I think this is the beginning of that final point in our complex adaptive system where it reaches the crisis point and we either collapse into extinction or we emerge into the new system. So that was slightly long-winded and I'm sorry, but that takes us to, that was my understanding as I spent the whole of 2018 trying to get to grips with what did that image mean of, and what was my role in it. And what arose over the period of that year was that I'm not certain we can get to the emergence into the next system, but I'm going to give every single particle of my energy into trying to make it happen, because the alternative is extinction. Not just for us, but for everything else that's currently walking on the planet. I don't know if you guys have read the GOES paper, have you? The Global Oceanic Environmental Survey. Does that ring any bells? Yes? Yes? Okay. So if we don't do something by 2045, the oceans are dead. And dead oceans mean things like the Gulf Stream will stop, because the Gulf Stream, I discovered, is actually promoted by the sperm whales that can dive. The reason they've got this thing in their head is they can go all the way down to the bottom, they scoop up stuff at the bottom, and they come up and they spit it out at the top. And that action is what keeps ocean currents circulating. So without the sperm whales, no Gulf Stream, Britain's future climate then becomes equivalent to Moscow. And, it's going to be hell on wheels and hot in the summer, and it might be minus 40 in the winter.
And no oxygen either.
Yes, no, the oxygen thing is also. I've had people query that. I'm not as certain about that, but it's still, that's the one thing that, everybody, white people like us tend to go, oh, global warming, it's not good. It's going to be terribly bad in the global south. Brown people are going to have a terrible hard time. And then you go, 50% oxygen. I think that hits the whole world. And it's like, oh, God, we're not safe, which is an interesting thing to watch. Anyway, we need to act, and we need to act now. So then my thinking gets to, what does it take? And this is a lot of time spent on this hill going, okay, you guys sent me these visions. I am assuming you know the answers. Please tell me, what do I need to do? And what came back was whatever it takes to promote conscious evolution. So I evolved, and thank you for putting out Accidental Gods. I've thrown up some other websites that have evolved since, and the Manda Scott one, which is before that, that we need to work. Well, conscious evolution doesn't happen by sitting reading Twitter. It just doesn't. So we need actively to work towards it. It's not just the evolution of our consciousness, it's the conscious choice to evolve. And that takes a bit of time and a bit of effort. But how could I break it down? My target audience was a single mother with 2 kids under the age of 10. And this was before COVID hit, so at least the kids were going to school. But that was who I had in my head. Can I create something that will compete with Twitter and Facebook and TikTok and all the rest of it, Instagram, and give people the toolkit to get to a place where we can't predict, this is the definition of complex adaptive systems, the emergence is not predictable, but we can at least take ourselves to the leading edge of our existing system, in the belief that that's basically the imaginal cells clumping together to be imaginal islands. There's a good jumping off point to the emergence and a reduction in the potential for the collapse into extinction. So Accidental Gods evolved out of that, and I evolved a 6-step system. And I put it out in the world, and I thought, a couple of million people should do it, tipping point. We're going to get some kind of tipping. One of the things I was told was, you don't need everybody there. You need a critical mass of people to lead the rest. And I had no idea what that critical mass was, but I'm going to do what it takes to get there. And what we've discovered over time is that most people don't want to spend half an hour a day meditating. Even if I put little voice meditations out there and go, all you have to do is put on your headphones and play this. We've got a core group that kind of fluctuates, but there's a core of a few hundred that are dedicated in doing it. And then there's the rest who kind of come in, look at it and go, oh, that's a bit hard. I don't think I've really got time. I'll do it next week, and go out again. And this is one of the things that I find, even with the dreaming, the one website I haven't put up is I teach the dreaming. So now we're making accidental gods a prerequisite to coming into the dreaming, partly because we discovered how much it helped people have a baseline. But I've been teaching the dreaming for 20 years. And again, people, there's hundreds of people go through the foundation class, and I'm about to teach our elder group, and there's 6 now of the 9 that 3 years ago, because it's hard work, because it requires that you actually commit to doing it. And I think that once you there's a kind of a quite hard bit, and then once you get over into everything begins to feed back, then it's amazing and it's effortless. And why would you not do it all day, every day? Work, life, but it's there, and it's a thing that wants to happen. But getting over that hump is hard, and I haven't found a way over that. I've started teaching gatherings and things to try and break it down, make it easier. But what I came to then, because I kept saying, we designed this, and Faith is my partner, designs websites, and so she was integral to creating the look and the feel and the way it works. I can kind of generate the content, but I have no idea how to get it out in the world, and she does, so that's a good partnership. And it started in December 2018, and from the beginning of, once I understood what we were doing, it was okay, we have to have it out by the solstice of this 2019. And we'd get to September and Faith would be going, really, we're not going to be ready. Can we not just do it in the spring? And I'd go up the hill and they'd go, no, it has to be December. And I'd come back and go, I'm really sorry, it has to be December. And we'd have quite interesting conversations about what's going on. But no, it has to be December. And we got it out by December, and then COVID hit. And so we got it out, and we got enough people beginning to come through to kind of iron out. The early ask was way too much for most people, so I dialed it right down. And so by the time COVID hit, we had something that people could at least do. And then we had COVID. So coming out of COVID, I had another shamanic event that you probably don't need to know about, as a result of which I ended up writing a novel. I thought I'd given up writing, but you have to write this novel. And the novel is a Thrutopian novel. It's what does the future, I realized that one of the things we laughed. Well, that came from Rupert Reed. That absolutely, he said, "This is what you're doing is Thrutopia." I went, oh, really? So, and so he's there. It's his, but because it's so lazy and easy to write dystopias, it makes me so cross. People are still writing them, and they're pointless. Okay, triggered. Stop. But there's 2 things. First of all, people write them and they go, well, if people see how bad it's going to be, they'll change. You think, no, people have been writing dystopias for decades, and look where we are. It doesn't work. Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale, and look what's happening in America. It hasn't stopped it. Thank you. Some people are taking it as a directional lineage. Yeah. So first, it doesn't work, and second, where everything that we know about human energy is that you get to where you think you're going. And if where you think you're going is that we're all going to be kebabbed over piles of burning tires by our bigger and nastier neighbors, then guess what? That is exactly where we'll get to. And if we don't, as creatives now, offer people the visions of what it looks like when we get to a flourishing future that actually fucking works, because we've mapped it out. And look, do you want to get there? Yeah, we all want to get there. Look, it's good, and we can look. Here's the roadmap. Here are the steps that we need to take. So that's my whole thrust. Accidental Gods still goes, and I'm still running it. And this evening, I've got every first and third Wednesday of the month, we run a webinar, and people come and we talk through stuff. That's still there, but the novel and Thrutopia, and trying to get other writers to write futures that work instead of these expletive deleted dystopias or historical novels. Why is anybody writing history anymore, really? Because again, I wrote the Boudica books thinking if we saw who we were, realized that we were at the dying days of the Roman Empire, we would see who we could be. That was 20 years ago. Where are we? It's not worked. I'm really sorry. I tried.
So, this is beautiful. This is fascinating. So so interesting, but just so I can check, because I'm conscious that
I haven't answered your question.
Well, you haven't, but that's fine.
I'll get there.
But also that I know other people on the call want to ask you questions as well. But just so that I can understand what you're saying is, and I agree with you so much about the power of human intention. But going back to the metaphor of the butterfly, are you saying that the entire kind of physics of what it takes to be alive as a human could change? Like, you know, we won't need oxygen, we won't need...
I doubt it. No, I think the entire neuropsychology of what it means to be human will change. I doubt if, I would be really surprised if our actual metabolism changed much. I mean, it could do, who knows? This is the point of complex adaptive systems. But no, I think this is a more, so what I think we need to do, I haven't really got to that, is I developed 6 stages, and I won't talk you all through, and they're on the website, but the core, where we're heading for, is that each of us can, with authenticity, integrity, groundedness, and clarity, connect to the web of life, become part of that extraordinary web that I saw in that first vision. When we get there, we ask of the web, what do you want of me? And we are able to respond in real time. Because I think we have this bizarre idea that humans have to fix everything that we've broken. Which, you know, and you can kind of see that I made the mess, I have to clear it up. But actually, we have broken a complex adaptive system. There is not the slightest chance of us with our linear thinking understanding how to fix it. So what we have to do, I think, is connect to the web of life, and on the assumption that there is with an intelligence of the web that understands. And then all I have to do is to be what only I can be. Because I am here, and each of us can be that. But the process of getting to the point where I can ask of the web of life, what do you want of me, and be it, is discovering what it is that I am with clarity, losing the projections, losing the fears, losing all the stuff loaded onto us by our culture and our parents and our ancestry and all that stuff, and getting to the clarity and the connectedness and the coherence of who am I and what can I do in the moment. Having said all of that, I think there's an awful lot we can do just practically to not be part of, to be, you know, there's the very old and very cliched, but nonetheless true aphorism, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And making ourselves part of the solution, I think, is what the Thrutopian thing is now, is what can I actually practically do today while I'm doing the inner work to get to the place where I can connect to the web of life.
Right.
Does that answer your question as you asked it?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, you have answered so what does it mean to live well now? Yeah, very much. Thank you. I think there's practical things we can do. There's a whole list of practical stuff that brings us to the leading edge of that's really what the website, what the podcast is for, is what are people doing today that helps to create the ripples that will break the old system and usher in. I mean, part of Thrutopia is that we need a peaceful transition to a system that works. And I don't think that's emergence into a new system, but I think we can nonetheless take what is a profoundly broken political, economic, practical, logistical system and make it much, much better. It's not hard to imagine ways in which the current system could be better. That's not emergence into a new system. But I think, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Joanna Macy, but she's got the 3 pillars of the Great Turning. So the holding actions is just stop the damage. The systems change is how do we change this system? And then the shifting consciousness for me is how do we emerge into a new system? Yeah. No, and I still find Joanna's stuff really inspiring, but I noticed just over the last year or so, she's getting more pessimistic. She is. Yes. Yes. And one can see why, but I also think we get the whole about an intention. You get where you aim for. I'll tell you a very small story. Donnacha McCarthy came on the podcast a few weeks ago, probably 6 weeks or so. He's an extraordinary man. Listen to the podcast. He understands the setting of intent. He's used it through his life, and he's environment editor for the Independent, when it used to be a real newspaper. And now he's a really
really full-on activist. He's the guy who goes on GMB TV and sits in the bear pit and talks sense while they're destroying him. And he came on the podcast and said, there are 59 old white men and one old white woman who control the world's media. If those 60 people decided that they were going to be wholeheartedly behind the move, the peaceful move towards a regenerative system, the world would change. That's one thing that we could all change. So I got to the end of the podcast and thought, yeah, I could do that. And I tried in my morning ceremony setting that intent the next morning. And I got to this place where, imagine, all of us, just shut your eyes and imagine that the whole of the world's media, so the Mail, Fox, Breitbart, the Telegraph, all around the world, have decided that they are going to be wholly behind the peaceful transformation to a regenerative system. How does that feel? I mean, you don't need to worry how you get there. Please don't worry how you get there. Just imagine that it has happened. And you wake up in the morning and everything on the media, the legacy media and social media, is wholeheartedly behind the peaceful transition to a regenerative system. So for me, I think, my God, I feel open. My shoulders just stop being up around my ears. I can breathe better. I had that sort of, God, yes, we could do, that would bring the creativity of humanity. Humanity is astonishingly creative into alignment together. That could do it. So, and I had this vision again of me and Donica doing a high five. Yeah, we did it. We did it. Okay, yes. And so over the weeks, he got in touch and said, you really got it. I mean, I really did. And we've set up a group of 8, Lynn McTaggart's group of 8 intention setting. 5 of us dreamers, it doesn't matter who. And for the last 2 weeks, we've been doing it every Tuesday morning, or every Tuesday, whenever appropriate, we've gone through the intention setting of that intention. And Donica emailed me on Monday to say, the Indie has changed its policy and he's now allowed to write stuff that he wasn't. He's been 3 times on right-wing television and they treated him decently and listened to what he was saying. And he's about to have a meeting with one of the core groups that he really needs to get them on board with this idea. So setting, I'm taking that as a win. Yeah. Setting intention works. You just need to be clear what you're setting it for. So if anybody wants to set intention, I think that the world's media are wholeheartedly behind the peaceful transition to a regenerative future.
Yeah.
It's clear, it's succinct, it's unambiguous.
More practice in imagining that, but yeah, it's a really good thing to try. I was recently listening to Daniel Schmachtenberger, collective sense making, and he was saying, imagine similar kind of thing, but just much narrower. Imagine if Facebook, because they could do this, completely turned the algorithm the other way around, so that it focused rather than on, limbic hijack and polarity, and that it focused on connection.
Yes.
And that would change the world overnight. But anyway, well, I have about another 17 questions, but I'm not going to ask them. I'm going to throw it open now to the group. So, fabulously interesting so far. Who's got something they want to ask or challenge? Over to you. Just unmute yourself and go for it. Oh, I thought you'd all be...
I could keep talking. I have no effort. Effortless. I can talk forever. I've just put up a link to Tristan Harris's podcast, which if you don't listen to it, he qualified he got his postgrad at the Digital Persuasion Laboratory in Stanford. That exists. It's a thing. And then he worked in Google's ethics department until he realized it was wholly unethical. And then he set up the Center for Humane Technology, and he was the motive force behind the docudrama, what was it called? The Social Dilemma. Yeah. And this is his podcast, which is wholly devoted to how can we make social media into something that's part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Brilliant, thank you. And John, I see you've unmuted yourself.
Well, mean, the Irish guy has to step in if nobody else will. It's a little difficult for me because I've spoken with Kimberly quite a bit, and I've spoken to the group, and somebody kindly mentioned that they saw me chatting to David Baum recently as well. And I hope, Mandy, you're up for.
I am. I can't really hear you, but my computer's not letting me.
Can anybody else hear me? Is that reasonably okay?
I can hear, but it's very faint. But I haven't got a volume control at the moment. So
okay,
can you just shout
maybe.
a bit?
Sure. I'm Irish. I don't shout. Hold on a second. I said volume control. There we go. Is that any better? Does that work? Yes,
that is a bit better. Yep.
Bloody hell. Yeah, okay. Okay. Maybe I'll turn it down just a smidgen. So I don't know why, and I'll try and articulate it a little bit. I'll see what comes out, but I'm feeling very uneasy. I'm not taken. I'm not persuaded. You're not connecting with me, and I don't know why. There's a series of things, triggers for me. So you say, "I'll make sense. I need to make sense of it." What do you mean? I go into the notion of sense and somatic terms. What do you mean by making sense? I need to feel that, and I'm not feeling it. You talk about complex emergent systems. I funded a guy called John Schellenhuber, who's one of the world's leading so-called climate scientists 20 years ago, in the first project when the properties of emergent systems, everybody was doing research to do the properties of emergent systems. And he was a physicist in the whatever that institute was he was in, and he wanted to test his theories on the climate. So we had some fun and games with that. He remains a friend, a personal kind of a friend, but having written the Pope's encyclical on climate change and all sorts of other weird things, he sort of disappeared into a strange place now. That's okay too. The intentionality. There's an awful lot of kind of pseudo-pop science in that I don't like, not just because it's pseudo-pop science, because it can also work, but more because I'm much more drawn to precisely the opposite, being completely unattached to outcomes. What's of interest to me is not a kind of a pretense that I can, make my DNA or synapses or microtubules behave in a particular fashion, but that I can become part of what is now and present to me. That's an experience I've had a lot with Kimberly in particular. She has this great gift of grounding people in the actuality of the moment, like what is actually happening here and now. I'm bothered by yet another path to redemption. There's an awful lot of paths to redemption, all of them false. Never forget, kill the Buddha, as Alan Watts and so many other people. If you meet the Buddha, kill him. The point is that it's here now, and it's available to you if you're capable. I don't know how that happens. We have the Catholic Church's wonderful theories about grace. We have the ascetics bending their legs around their necks for 20 years, and somehow you reach a path of enlightenment. You seem to have a sixfold path. Sounds very like Buddhism to me. So there's so many things. Here we go again. Follow me. Oh, how shall we fuck off, Lord? I just find it bothersome. That yes, here we have another trail. I think I possibly went through something similar to you at the beginning of COVID, because I was leading the revolution inside the European Commission. I kind of 500 people who were part of this group that I had to call limited list, because if I called it anything else, we'd get fired. And I was sitting there hammering on my computer at the beginning of COVID, sort of saying, and the change will not come about through sending emails, even if you're very angry. And then I said, fuck it, I'm sending an angry email. So I literally said, hence I will stop. And I hit the return button and I never sent another thing. And yet I feel I've connected much more profoundly. Again, the people are fewer and far between. The people like Kimberly, the people like David Baum. They're not people, oddly enough, like Jem Bendell, though. I've done lots of interviews with Jem as well. They're different people who seem to me to be involved in only one thing, being present and being part of that presence. I know that sounds a little bit complicated, but
No,
so,
that's clear. I'm going to stop you, John, just in
sorry, I could go on forever. Thank you.
I know you can, just in the interest of time.
Yeah.
So no, I think that's really clear. Manda, do you want to come back, because it's you know, you're coming from different places, and that's obviously fine. But
I think we're coming from identical places, to be honest.
I think so too, bizarrely enough.
So, I mean, there's nothing in what you said that I would disagree with. I am endeavoring to find ways that ordinary people can get to. For me, how do I ask the web of life, what do you want to me, and respond in real time is exactly what you've just described. But most people don't know how to get there. And I think we need a critical mass of people who are there. And I am prepared to do what it takes to try and enable them to get there. But in the meantime, because actually most people don't want to spend half an hour a day meditating, if that's what it takes, then I think creating a vision of a future that works is also necessary. I think we don't have that. Our governments don't have it. Our media don't have it. You know, when you switch on the television, you get business as usual, which is just bizarre. And we need narratives that are different, that show us a path forward to a different. So I think there's two arms. One is, yes, we need the people to be present. But I look at my partner's daughter's generation, and there's just not part of their reality. They're busy trying to find ways to pay the mortgage and, you know, get the kids to school and not get COVID. And so there are those who are really invested in learning how to be present, and there are those who really aren't. And I don't think there's time. I think, you know, yes, waiting for everyone to reach enlightenment is fine if you really want to do that. But we have, I think, an extremely short time window in which there is still room to act before we hit the kind of societal breakdown that Jem talks about. I think we're on the way now. And I want not to get there. I want the grandkids to grow in a world where they can look forward down a timeline and see it at least being tolerable.
Really
and so
quick return.
We need to produce the ideas that create that.
Just a really quick return on that. The last thing I would ever do would say, wait for enlightenment. What one does is one immerses oneself in one's presence, whatever that present is. Say somebody who really inspires, and I like is Kimberly, that notion of being powerfully present with your community. I think that's something she does. Maybe what your partner's kids need to be doing is being powerfully present, bringing their children to school, rather than, you know.
Yeah, but you tell them they need to be doing that, and they're not going to. That has to come from inside.
That's the point I was going to say. The other thing, and it's just a detail that I would put in here. I've worked in the science of climate change for the last 20 years, as I say, starting with John Schellenhuber. There is now no more hope for humanity. I would just like to put that out there. There will be no human beings on this planet in our current format, whatever you consider that to be, within 20 years, more than likely much earlier than that. Where, when people don't seem to understand what abrupt means, it is the third derivative. First derivative is distance over time. Second derivative is change. The third derivative is abrupt. There is no stopping this now. So another thing that kind of deeply bothers me about it is the notion of putting something out there that you can aim at, rather than pulling it together in that tighter way. Sorry.
Oh, thank you, John. Okay, who else? We've only got just under 15 minutes.
Sue's got her hand up.
Oh, great. Thank you. Sue, unmute yourself if you would.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
It's bringing to mind the women's movement, because in my 20s onwards, I was very involved in consciousness raising groups, and there was a whole network of women doing that, and they met in small groups. Nobody was in charge or telling them what to do. And they talked about their own experience. They knew they weren't happy with where they were. They didn't necessarily have the plan all worked out about where they were going. you know, things change by talking about it and listening to one another, sharing their feelings as well as their thoughts. It wasn't all just rational, you know, planning and all the rest of it. And a huge change came out of that. And it's still changing, really. And I just wonder if sort of group work might be a way to break down people's isolation and come up with new experiences and new ideas.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I think that's what you're already doing. And I think you're right. I think the future is in community. I would disagree profoundly with John that the human race is heading for extinction. I think there is still a potential, but I think we need to map out a route that changes. I think we need Joanna Macy's second, we need the holding actions, we need the systemic change. And I think systemic change is still possible. And I think there's a very narrow window, and I think the chances are not great, but I think there is still a potential for total systemic change. But we need to get there, and we will only get there by, exactly as you say, community groups, people creating. I think there are two sets of communities. There's communities of place, and there are communities of purpose, which are what the net facilitates. So our communities uniquely now, in this era of human existence, don't have to be within walking distance.
Yeah.
You can create extraordinary communities with people that you've never met in person. And I think those are the two community sets that will make the change. But I think those community sets can either there's a possibility that each little community set works in isolation, or that we create the framework and the vision and the potential and the narratives whereby those community sets can see that they are part of a greater whole. And if we can create that vision of being part of a greater whole, then humanity as a whole has a chance to move and bring its creativity to bear in a way that matters. And if we don't, then yes, we're screwed.
Okay, thank you. Okay, time for one, possibly two more. And yeah, what are you curious about? What are you?
Everyone's very quiet.
Yeah, it's not like them actually as a group. Come on, Jess.
Can you hear me?
Oh, who's that? Is that Jessica?
Yeah.
Jessica Ryle. Okay, Jessica Ryle this time.
Yeah. So what I was hearing in what you were saying, Manda, is the example you gave about changing the media, getting people together with an intention of, and kind of really imagining that and the impact that it had on action now. And what I heard was, in the present moment, which is all we have, that in itself has created a ripple, which I just thought was just so lovely, that the way, you're talking about it all starts from inside, and that's essentially it's profound change from the inside, isn't it? That kind of giving the opportunity to people to embody something different, and in this moment create change by our individual in the second choices which then occur to us. And it kind of is so lovely in comparison to sort of examples recently about that collective negativity, which in itself creates our reality in this moment, because that's the way we're thinking about it. And I was just really struck with how, we are the change. We are the change. That's all there is. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but I just thought it was really, it really spoke to me.
Yeah. Thank you.
It does make sense. Thank you. Yes.
And yes, have you got something?
And so, as you know, there's always so much I want to say, Kim, and yet I'm very good at sitting quietly. The first reflection was I'm your exact target audience, and everything you've said is just, for me personally, it was. I don't know why. I didn't know why I was coming. I heard everything you said. It's come clear exactly why I'm here, because yeah, I think I just so resonate with what you say about setting intention, and I also resonate with what you were saying, John, around it almost being another form of hopium if you're not careful, and when I heard you both speaking, I could totally see that actually you were saying the same thing from a different position, because hopium doesn't come from the present. In my opinion, hopium is something we imagine to escape from the present, whereas what we can imagine from the present is very different, and yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you, Jess. Yeah, I knew there was a reason I wanted to bring you in. Fantastic. So excellent, and we've run out of time. I just want to say thank you so much, Manda. She's been incredibly rich and so much food for thought. And again, if I can invite everybody to go and have a look at those websites that Manda's put up, there are so many resources there for you know, going along that journey that Manda was talking about.
Oh, I spelled Vaclav wrong.
Yeah.
Sorry, Vaclav. I spelled it wrong. I just think, you know, hopium's easy to spin at people, but actually we need visions of a future that is different. We live in a world where it's easier to imagine the total extinction of humanity than it is to imagine a different system to capitalism, which is horrifying, because capitalism arose, you know, since the Romans. It's a tiny, tiny fraction of our time. And I think we need the visions of a different world. If we do nothing else with our lives, then creating a concept that there is a potential for something different and how we get there. You know, utopias are as bad as dystopias. Utopias are all predicated on something has happened and we're, you know, in one bound they were free. Quite. But I think genuinely, if all you guys ever do for the next 10 years is imagine ways through to a future that you could live with and how we get there and what it looks like and what it feels like, then I think that's not hopium. I think that's a really worthwhile step, because then you can talk about it to people. And it's not just continual iterations of, oh God, everything's awful and we're all going to die, which isn't, you know, if it's, that might be true, but it's not useful. It doesn't tell anybody anything. And we've tried it for the last 40 years. And it's got us to a prime minister who's an active climate denier. So, you know, it doesn't work. You know, and that, I think that's the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing time after time and expecting a different result. We've really tried that one and it really didn't work. So now we need to try something different, I think. End of rant.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Manda. Thank you everybody who came, really grateful, and look out on the Heart website for future upcoming conversations. We've got a lot going on at the moment. And yeah, just thrilling to see you all and sending you lots and lots of love, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me know when the YouTube goes up and I'll put it out on various
I will. Thank you, Manda.
social media.
All right.
Yeah.
If everybody unmutes and just says au revoir and
Thank you so much.
Uh-huh.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Kim.
Bye, everyone.